This is CBN Newswatch.
And thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ephraim Graham. We want to begin this half hour in the Middle East, where the Israeli Defense Force says it's reached a major victory in a part of Gaza. Meanwhile, the Biden administration continues its push for a Palestinian state while issuing an executive order targeting Israelis in the West Bank. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell has more now from Jerusalem.
Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says the IDF reached a major military milestone, the defeat of Hamas in Khan Yunis. Now he says the IDF is moving on to their next targets.
The Khan Yunis brigade boasted that it would stand strong against the IDF. Today it is dismantled. And I'm telling you that we are completing the mission in Khan Yunis. And we will also reach Rafah, and we will eliminate anyone who's there, who is a terrorist, who is trying to attack us.
On the diplomatic front, the State Department kept up its push for a Palestinian state and implement a two-state solution. Thomas Friedman of the New York Times reported on what he says is part of President Biden's doctrine for an unprecedented diplomatic initiative to promote a Palestinian state now. UK Foreign Minister David Cameron said Thursday his country could recognize a Palestinian state.
That's long been our position. And of course, as part of that, Britain, along with other countries, would recognize Palestine as a country and recognize Palestine at the United Nations.
Britain's top diplomat said the UK's recognition could come after a ceasefire in Gaza, without waiting for talks to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The push for a Palestinian state comes while Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejects it, along with the rest of the government and the majority of the Israeli people who oppose it, as their sons and daughters are fighting the same people who would make up that state. On Thursday, in an unprecedented move, President Biden issued an executive order that targets Israelis in the West Bank who have been accused of attacking Palestinians in biblical Judea and Samaria.
That we will also take action on behalf of the United States, both against those who engage in settler violence and extremist settler violence that have been prosecuted by governments, and others who have not.
Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu issued a statement that says, in part, the vast majority of residents of Judea and Samaria are law-abiding citizens, many of whom are fighting right now in active and reserve duty to protect Israel. Israel acts against all violators of the law in all places, and therefore there was no place for drastic steps on this matter. The move came as Democratic voters are deeply split over Biden's conduct of the war, and he's losing support among Arab Americans, especially in Michigan, where he campaigned Thursday. Meanwhile, U.S. negotiators are pushing for a ceasefire that could release more hostages.
It's terrible, okay, because in the last time we did a ceasefire, we lost a lot of soldiers after that.
And let's take a deeper look now with Chris Mitchell in Jerusalem. So, Chris, let's begin with America's push for a ceasefire. Where does that stand right now? We know the ceasefire would have to include releasing more hostages.
Yeah, that's right, Ephraim. They are pushing for a ceasefire that would actually stall the IDF's military campaign right now and hopefully eventually lead to a more lasting truce. At least that's according to some of the reports about the U.S. negotiations. It would presumably be a three-part deal. Some of those terms would include the release of hostages with the six-week ceasefire. However, as we said in our report, contrary to the stated goals of Prime Minister Netanyahu, he said earlier this week that he told a group of Jewish students that Israel won't stop until complete victory. And this is also what most Israelis want to see. And I think especially a number of the soldiers as well who have been inside Gaza, they don't want their efforts or the lives of those brothers and in arms, so to speak, that have lost their lives. So there's a real sentiment here in Israel to keep the war going until they eliminate Hamas.
You also reported that the Biden administration issued an executive order targeting Israelis in the West Bank accused of attacking Palestinians. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says there is no place for these drastic steps. What specifically are some of the steps that Biden is proposing in this executive order?
Well, one of the steps is sanctioning for individuals specifically and individually, and also putting the Israeli government on notice to make sure that they do more to quench this. Some Israelis that I've talked to say the action really puts Israeli residents who have committed crimes, and there have been some, on the same level as many Palestinians have committed terrorist acts. And we're talking about Israel arresting about 3,000 terrorists, many of them affiliated with Hamas. So they see a moral equivalency here that's really not warranted.
All right, real quick, we've got less than 30 seconds. What can we expect on Jerusalem Dateline tonight?
Well, a story on the mothers of the IDF who want the Biden administration to stop aid that actually gets stolen by Hamas, a group called the IDSF, addressing many of the challenges facing Israel right now. We also have a clip from Robert Stearns and Gordon Robertson talking about how Jews and Christians can work together to support Israel. All
right. Thanks a lot, Chris. Much appreciated. The convoy of truckers is demanding a change in policy. They argue the government is making it harder for Texas to protect its border while making it easier on migrants headed for the United States. CBN's Chuck Holton reports now from Texas.
The UN is under scrutiny for providing financial support to migrants who travel across Central America to the U.S. border. According to the Center for Immigration Studies, this could add up to more than $1 billion. Much of it courtesy of the American taxpayer.
So the United Nations for 2024 envisions spending $1.6 billion, a lot of it U.S. tax funded, on the migration trails to help about 3 million immigrants, many of whom they know to be traveling to the U.S. border to cross illegally, and who are also crossing illegally lots of countries between where they are and the U.S. border. This money will take the form of cash debit cards, $370 million in just cash debit cards, cash-filled envelopes, and cash vouchers that they can use for anything and everything that they need along the way. Well, this is a big help. A lot of these people that are recipients and beneficiaries of this kind of largesse might have stayed home were it not for the guarantee.
Here in Eagle Pass, Texas, you can see Shelby Park back there behind me, and you can see the National Guardsman there with his Humvee, and they're setting up razor wire all along this side of the border to keep out the flow of migrants from the south. And this is kind of a perfect storm coming to pass right here, because you've got the National Guardsmen and the Border Patrol that are at odds, and there's a caravan of migrants coming up from the south and a caravan of truckers and patriots coming from the north. But that caravan of truckers wants people to understand that they're not coming to do any kind of violence or blockade the border or interfere with law enforcement. They're really just coming here to pray.
So this whole thing started off as a pastor from North Texas wanting to set up a tent revival on the border. He got a word that he needed to do that. I said, I'll help you out. I'm on the border all the time. They want us to show that the Constitution is not being upheld, something that results in second, third order effects, human trafficking, fentanyl. I call it a chemical warfare coming across the border, children being used and abused and sometimes killed in that process.
Chambers maintains the convoy represents a widespread American frustration with the government's handling of border security and the belief that America is still worth saving.
We just don't live in a spirit of fear in Texas, number one. And there is an American character that exists in this country that we fought for to continue to uphold the U.S. Constitution.
Chuck Holton, CBN News, Dripping Springs, Texas.
The Federal Reserve is holding interest rates steady for the fourth straight time, with many on Wall Street eagerly anticipating rate cuts later in 2024. This follows the International Monetary Fund upgrading its 2024 global growth forecast. As CBN's Abigail Robertson reports, it also comes as American consumers appear to grow more confident.
Fears over a possible U.S. recession are starting to fade, with recent U.S. economic reports displaying strong resilience, leading the IMF to also predict a soft landing for global growth.
With inflation declining steadily and growth holding up, the chance of a soft landing has increased.
The IMF's chief economist warns, however, the expansion remains slow and risks remain.
Maybe if central banks remain too tight for too long, there could be a slowdown in economic activity, or if there is a tightening of financial conditions, or if there is another round of supply shocks, for instance, there could be downside to the global economy. But there can also be upside to the global economy. Inflation could be continuing to come down back toward targets.
At the end of 2023, the U.S. economy grew higher than anticipated, while consumer spending in December also rose.
We were seeing maybe inflation being very persistent. There were a lot of concerns about the fact that the fight against inflation would potentially bring a recession. And 1 year later, we are in a situation where growth has held steady and inflation has been coming down. So there's certainly a very good development.
Still, some experts warn the U.S. may not be out of the woods yet, with certain sectors of the economy slowing due to the Federal Reserve's interest rate increases to fight inflation.
Inflation is still too high. Ongoing progress in bringing it down is not assured, and the path forward is uncertain.
Many financial experts predict the economy may cool a bit this quarter amid high interest rates, but believe the chances of a recession have decreased as inflation moderates. Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Coming up, Christians killed, churches closed, and entire communities forced to flee. A new report highlights the horrors of religious persecution. We're going to show you where when we're coming back. You're watching CBN Newswatch. Welcome back to CBN Newswatch. Around the world, more than 365 million Christians face persecution for their faith. Each year, Open Doors International reveals its World Watch List, detailing the worst offenders. This year's report highlights horrific stories of religious persecution across Africa. CBN's Gary Lane has more.
The usual countries of concern top this year's Open Doors World Watch list. North Korea is the top persecutor of Christians, followed by Somalia, Libya, Eritrea, and Yemen, home of the Iranian-backed Houthi militia, the group attacking ships transiting the Red Sea. Open Doors U.S. CEO Ryan Brown says of the greatest concern is the rising tide of violence worldwide against followers of Christ, especially by Islamic and autocratic regimes in sub-Saharan Africa.
Christians can become easy targets for those that are looking to create instability within those environments. They can do so with impunity. They've received no consequence for those actions because, again, Christians are not often protected or recognized by the governments in those areas.
The report documents that 4,998 Christians died for their faith in 2023, but many deaths might go unreported. That's compared to 5,621 the previous year. Although the overall global death numbers are down, I know you found that more than 82% of the Christians killed for faith reasons were in Nigeria.
Christians do suffer severely because of their faith in Nigeria. The number of people that have been killed because of their faith, that number surpasses all other countries in the globe combined. So truly an area where there's a lot of instability and a lot of need to be lifting up our brothers and sisters in prayer.
And most surprising in this year's report, Nicaragua. The country led by the communist Sandinistas and Daniel Ortega jumped 20 places from number 50 in 2023 to 30 on the 2024 list.
It is one that continues to see alarming trends where the government is really seeing the Christian population as threats to the government, as threats to control, and therefore enact these persecutions against believers in those areas.
However, on January 14th, the Nicaraguan government announced the release of 2 Catholic bishops and 15 priests from prison. Among them was Bishop Rolando Alvarez, imprisoned for more than a year. Global Christian Relief CEO David Curry says it's important for the world to learn about Christian persecution through the documentation and indexing of incidents.
People often turn aside from the fact that Christians are even persecuted at all, because in our Western mindset, they just don't understand the scope of the problem.
Curry's organization has created a new global database recording violent acts of religious persecution.
It's time that we see it as a global problem, that extremists are targeting Jews and Christians and others for their faith.
As for Brown, he hopes the 2024 World Watch list will motivate people to pray.
So many of our brothers and sisters are not necessarily seeking to flee that persecution, not looking to escape that persecution, but simply seeking to be the hands and feet of Christ within that context of persecution, looking to, for prayer, for encouragement that their testimony and their faith will not falter or fail in the face of such mounting odds.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
Still ahead, an Olympic runner in the race for her life, only this race didn't come with a gold medal on the line. Sydney Mclocklin tells us how she conquered her biggest fears. Stay with us. You're watching CBN Newswatch. Welcome back to CBN Newswatch. Sydney Mclocklin is a two-time Olympic gold medalist. She used to be crippled with anxiety before and after each race until her faith helped her learn a critical lesson, that she still wins no matter when she crosses the finish line. Here's sports reporter Will Dawson with her story.
It's going to be Sydney's time again, and it's a world record again.
She's the world's fastest 400-meter hurdler and a two-time Olympic gold medalist. In 2016, at only 16 years old, Sydney Mclocklin became the youngest person in nearly 40 years to make the women's Olympic track team.
When did you know that you were not just good, but maybe even great?
I mean, I started running when I was 6, and I think it's kind of hard to tell when you're that young. You know, you're just running for the fun of wanting to run. But I think it wasn't until I got to high school, coming into now freshman year, but my first race was an indoor 300, and I actually won the race against some seniors. And I think that's when it kind of hit me that, wow, maybe I can actually, hang with these girls.
She did more than hang with them. Sydney quickly became the best hurdler in the country, qualifying for the 2016 Olympic Games in Rio. In spite of all the accolades and success, Sydney was struggling.
From an early age, as a runner, anxiety and fear plagued you. Where did that come from?
I think anxiety and fear for me kind of just came from my desire to want to be perfect in all things. And the reality is that nobody can do that. And I think for me, that was a constant battle internally of how do I get as close to perfect as possible in a world where you can't control your circumstances or what happens to you all the time. For me, it constantly left me in a state of fear. And especially on the track, racing against other people who are as good, if not better, that was a constant battle of, am I enough? Will I ever be enough, or will I ever measure up to the standard that I have for myself and that other people have for me?
Sydney did not medal at the Olympic Games in Rio and returned home for her senior year of high school. The reception wasn't what she expected.
I remember receiving messages actually on Instagram and people saying stuff like, you made it all the way to the Olympics not to get a medal. But I just knew from that point on, I was like, I need to figure out how to deal with this fear because I can't keep living like this.
Her next big hurdle was qualifying for the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo. In 2019, she competed in the World Championships in Doha, Qatar. For Sydney, anything short of first place would be unacceptable. As a perfectionist, her second place finish was heartbreaking.
Being able to make it all the way there on the world stage and still come up short, I think was just devastating for me. I still couldn't understand what all the fear was, all the anxiety, how to handle it.
Sydney grew up in a Christian home, though she never fully trusted God. The loss and growing anxiety forced her to cry out to him.
God, I need you. There's no way I'm gonna heal from all of this unless it's with you. And so during COVID, that was when I truly started seeking him. It was reading Colossians 3 that flipped a switch for me in terms of my thinking and just kind of how I saw everything. It just made the whole gospel make sense. The lens in which I viewed life had truly switched, and understanding that in and of myself, I have nothing to offer God, but it is just the righteousness of Jesus covering my life based upon my faith that is presentable before him.
Though Sydney had come up short in the World Championships, she had still qualified for the 2020 Games in Tokyo. While there, with a new focus on God, she set a new world record, taking home gold in the 4x400 relay and the 400-meter hurdles.
When you crossed the finish line, what were the emotions?
Relief, praise, thankfulness, excitement, disbelief, all those different things at once, but truly just like, thank you, God, for hearing my prayers and answering them, and just being kind to me. I think that's the number one thing every time I cross the line is like, God, you have not failed me. Even when I lose, I still win because I learn, and you still prune me and guide me and sustain me. And yeah, the girl who once used to cross the line and still feel empty inside, I now have joy even in the midst of any circumstance.
Today, Sydney is training for this year's Olympic Games in Paris. Win or lose, she has a new purpose. In her new book, Far Beyond Gold, Sydney discusses her battle with anxiety, fear, and letting go of her striving for perfection and simply running the race set before her.
Knowing that I'm running with that purpose of achieving the goal, and the goal is not gold medals, like the book said, it's far beyond gold. It's, achieving salvation, which is already mine in Jesus, but obviously running the race of the Christian life well. Even on the track, before races, that's what I'm reminding myself of, is setting my mind on the things above. Knowing that the Lord is looking down on my life right now, and me wanting to honor him, and he's glorified in that. And so it just became a joyful way of experiencing life and living life. And yeah, it's way better than I was thinking before.
Time now for your Friday Faithful. I leave you with this faithful thought as we wrap another week together. Faith demands action. Consider your circumstances, your problem, your issue, but don't stay there. Search the scripture and meditate on what God's word says about the matter. Say what he says and then move, act, do something to put feet to that faith. With that word, make this a Faith-Filled Friday and have yourself a wonderful weekend. That will do it for this edition of CBN Newswatch. Remember, you can always find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel. You can find them there at any time, as well as online, cbnnews.com. Take a moment. Let us know what you think about the stories you've seen here today or any day. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We look forward to seeing you right back here, same time Monday. Goodbye and God bless.